Park 8303's pilot had already sent out a Mayday distress signal, signaling that he had lost control and was no longer in command of the aircraft. Shortly after this warning, the sky was covered with black smoke and Karachi shook with a huge explosion. Only 430 meters from the airport, in a heavily populated section of Model Colony, the Airbus A320 crashed. Surprisingly, the inquiry report found no technical issue with the aircraft. How, therefore, did this terrible event occur? What exchanges took place in those last seconds between air traffic control and the pilot? What caused the initial attempt at landing to fail? What mysteries did the 3-year inquiry uncover? Welcome to another Historical Stories video. Let's examine what happened on May 22, 2020, in more detail. At 1 p.m. on this particular day, Park 8303 was supposed to depart Lahore for Karachi International Airport. The flight lasted only around 1 hour and 45 minutes. There were fewer flights at the time since COVID-19 lockdowns were in full force. However, flights were completely booked due to the start of Ramadan and the impending Eid vacations. Park 8303 carried 8 crew members and 91 passengers. Both in Karachi and Lahore, the weather was perfect that day. Sajjad Gul, the 58-year-old captain, had worked for Pakistan International Airlines, PIA, for 24 years and had 18,000 flight hours. Asman Azam, a 33-year-old first officer, had been with PIA for 10 years. The 16-year-old Airbus A320 was in top shape, having been maintained in accordance with Airbus guidelines. 2 CFM56 turbofan engines, which were essential to the plot, powered it. The flight left Lahore at 1:05 p.m., only 5 minutes late. It then rose to 34,000 feet, where it was predicted to stay for 45 minutes at cruising altitude. The pilots refused the food given by the cabin crew since they were fasting. The pilots conversed casually while operating on autopilot. The airplane was sent to the Karachi control tower at 1:22 p.m. after it had passed Nawab Shah. This signaled the start of Karachi's responsibility and the end of Nawab Shah control. The jet was greeted by Karachi control, who told it to head straight toward Makli. When an airplane reaches Nawab Shah, it typically confirms its course by selecting one of several options, such as Nawab Shah 2A, 2B, or 1C. At first, Park 8303 was given the longer Nawab Shah 2A route. However, as there was little air traffic because of the pandemic, the pilot was allowed to take a shortcut straight to Makli at their request. Because the pilot neglected to update the flight management computer, FMC, with a new path, this choice would ultimately prove disastrous. Assuming that the airplane was taking the lengthier 2A route, the FMC kept on running. Altitude changes were made incorrectly as a result of this error. The plane was descending at 1,000 feet per minute, which was too slow for the shorter route but appropriate for the 2A route. The plane was therefore still at 10,000 feet at Makli, although it should have been at 7,000 feet. After noticing the disparity, Karachi Control asked the pilot if they needed to circle in order to lower their altitude. The skipper turned down the offer and reassured them they could handle it. It seems that neither pilot knew the FMC was headed in the wrong direction. The plane quickly dropped, nose down, at 2,400 feet per minute as it got closer to Karachi. It should have been at 3,000 feet in altitude, but by the time it was 21 kilometers from the runway, it had fallen to 6,000 feet. Because the captain had unintentionally altered the radio frequency, air traffic control's repeated attempts to reach him were unsuccessful. Alarms began to sound in the cockpit at 1,300 feet because of the aircraft's excessive speed and altitude. The skipper insisted they could land in spite of this. The plane repeatedly impacted the runway without lowering the landing gear, which caused the engines to scratch the asphalt and leak oil. The pilots realized their error and tried to take off again. According to experts, the plane ought to have been halted on the runway so that emergency personnel could arrive. Despite one engine failing because of the damage, the skipper decided to go around instead. Soon after, the second engine arrived. The plane had lost power, was dropping altitude quickly, and could not return to the runway. The skipper called a mayday at this crucial juncture. Just 1,340 meters off the runway, Park 8303 crashed into a residential neighborhood a few seconds later. The black smoke was visible rising into the sky, and the explosion was audible from miles away. Only 2 of the 99 passengers made it out alive. Sadly, 1 person on the ground was also killed in the collision. The captain was primarily held accountable in the investigation report for his repeated rule violations and disregard for air traffic control directives. Additionally, the air traffic controller was judged responsible for not informing the pilots of the missing landing gear. It was also discovered that both pilots were fasting, which might have had an impact on how well they performed. As a result, it was later illegal to fast while flying, and it was shocking to learn that 40% of PIA pilots had questionable licenses.